So welcome to everybody who has logged in today. Thank you so much for joining us. And first webinar for 2024, so welcome. We are recording this webinar and it's going to be sent out to everybody attending and also those who weren't able to join us but did register. So just introducing, I'm Debbie from NDIS Property Australia. With me is Min Lee, our director, and Angad Singh from Nirvana Lifestyles. So some of you may have caught the podcast that Min and Angad recorded a couple of weeks back. I think it was released a couple of weeks back, discussing the NDIS review, or as Min likes to call it, NDIS 2.0. A lot of information in there and some very specific recommendations relating to home and living, including specialist disability accommodation. So when we first glanced at those review recommendations, there was a lot of consternation about what does this mean. They're talking about cutting out IL funding, IL as a category, what is going on, what does all these other things mean. So Angad, you had some time over the Christmas break to actually read the report in full and digest it and analyze it and come up with your analysis, which we heard all about in the podcast episode. So this is really a follow-on to go into more detail, and this is going to be a very open kind of Q&A session as well. We will run through some basics and an introduction and just invite everybody to pop their questions into the Q&A box down the bottom, and we will take it from there. Min.
Debbie, let's go back a little bit because we know what we'll talk about after. When the government, well, Minister Shorten dropped the bombshell about the changes on, pre-Christmas, what were our initial reactions, Debbie, and people overall about SDA?
Well, it was scary. They're recommending IL go, and we thought, wow, what about all the people that are building IL houses at the moment? Okay, yes, it looks like whatever's existing will be grandfathered in, but where does the point come when that stops happening? What's the cutoff point, and what does that mean for investors? And then we were looking at the 1 to 3 being the most commonly assumed supports. Does that mean that 3-tenant houses are what they're recommending? What does this all mean? So we were kind of looking at this and going, wow, okay, these are recommendations. Are they going to be implemented? When are we going to know what's going to be implemented? So yeah, without reading it properly, just looking at the points, it wasn't very clear what they were saying.
Yeah, you do really have to read the whole thing to understand the parts of it. Remember, this is a stack of recommendations, and they only kind of make sense when you understand what they're trying to do overall. And I certainly had that. At first glance, I felt the same way, and especially seeing some of the media headlines, some of the SDA spokespeople who were essentially taking snippets of the review, but presenting them out of context, usually for their own personal gain. And I guess, when I went back and actually read it in detail, that's when I was like, oh, this is actually a really good thing. We are in a really good spot with SDA. I think this is going to have a major, major positive impact on SDA and SDA funding overall.
Yeah. So, well, should we just quickly give a bit of an overview? I'll start my screen share, and we've got a little presentation here to
let's do it.
Go through. Let me see. Let me know that you're seeing the screen correctly.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. All right. So obviously this is Angad's presentation on this. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I think you all know me by now. Min and Debbie have been very kind to host me on their webinars and podcasts on several occasions. It's been a great pleasure. What we do, for those of you that may not already know, is we are builders and developers in Perth, Western Australia. We focus on SDA house and land packages that are provider-led throughout the Perth metropolitan region. Generally, what we do, we work with investors. When we've established a budget and a suitable type of location for that particular investor, we'll then go and find a provider and a block of land and try to bring the whole SDA puzzle together so that, all the stakeholders are engaged up front, and that gives us the best chance of a successful outcome. We do standard house land packages and also SMSF friendly packages as well. Next step, we can go to the next slide. Now, the NDIS review. Now, guys, if you're not aware of what's been going on or you haven't been up to speed with the NDIS, I might just give you a little bit of context, right? So as you've probably seen in the media, the NDIS has had massive, massive budget blowouts. And what's been happening is that Mr. Shorten here has been under an enormous amount of scrutiny about the way the NDIS is playing out. They're saying it's bigger than Medicare, it's going to be $100 billion and all of this. But not only are they spending too much money, what they're actually seeing as well is that there's inconsistent funding and they're getting really poor outcomes. The participants are actually not happy with the way the NDIS is going. There's stories about two twins basically who submit the same application to the NDIS and then they get different outcomes in terms of their funding requirements. And these types of, outcomes are really, really negative. So not only are they way over on their spending, they're actually not delivering the service that they were hoping to deliver out of that. And it's actually been coming to light over the last couple of years that there's a lot of bad actors in the NDIS space. The 2022 estimates for the fraud was around $1.4 billion. Now, put that into context, $1.4 billion to essentially disappear because of fraud and errors in a scheme at that time, which was about 20 billion, is ridiculous. Yeah. And that was really in 2018 what was driving the need for this particular review. And it kind of got put in front of the media like it's all about the budget cuts and everything else. But really, it was a review not just about the budget, but about the budget, the service, and the bad actors and how they're getting away with this fraud that's occurring, I guess. We can go to the next slide, Debbie. So that's what brought on this review. They called it in 2018, and it was just been released in December last year. This is not the SDA pricing review that came out in June, by the way. This is more broad than that. It covers the entire NDIS scheme, but you do need to read them both to understand the impact on the SDA market, I guess. So it's a comprehensive review. It culminated in 26 recommendations with 139 supporting actions, 2 of which are directly relevant to housing and living. Yeah. Now, like I said, for SDA, this is fantastic news. I'm really positive about pretty much every recommendation. If you're a SEAL provider, you probably don't share my sentiment at the moment because a lot of this stuff I think is actually targeted at the SEAL providers. So let's go on to the next. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, the way we're going to do this, by the way, is we're going to put some topics up on the screen. We'll have a little bit of a chat about some of the key themes or the big wins in SDA as a result of this review. And then it's going to be a bit of a choose your adventure. As part of my analysis, what I have done is I've looked at each specific action, provided some detail and my assessment of the impact. That's a detailed Word document, which Debbie will send out after. So you can see you can get a bit more detail on it. So this webinar is really about having a conversation. Here's, in my view, what the big wins that are going to lead to, a better outcomes for SDA in the medium term are. Firstly, they are being very, very clear about the mandating legal and practical separation for SIL and SDA. Currently, not only has it not been enforced legally, it's actually very impractical because of the way the funding is allocated to separate SIL and SDA. As a result of that, what we're getting, customer, client, participants are getting stuck in crappy houses when you've got brand new SDA properties that are right there. Yeah, they're not able to transfer because SIL providers are simply not sharing. They just don't want to lose this participant because of the SIL budget. And so the participant ends up living in really inappropriate accommodation. Plus, the SIL providers are basically saying, look, there's a vacancy here, you go here. They're not presenting any other types of options. They're not even, you see all this data about participants and then you've got vacant SDAs in the same location, which are far better quality than where the participants are living right now. It's not a very good outcome for participants.
Angad,
yes, mate.
I was in Sydney last week meeting up a few providers.
Yeah.
And also in Brisbane here.
Yeah.
And the SIL providers tell me that the marketplace is renowned for SIL providers withholding,
yes,
entrapping,
yes,
participants from getting out of their legacy and group homes to go to SDA homes.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not giving them the choice and control to do it because they
will
lose their profitability from the business.
Yeah. And just to understand the significance of this, in that 2023 review, or in this review, at the end of 2023, 55% of SDA participants were in legacy and group homes. More than half. Yeah. Now you imagine more than half of the people who have been given access to this amazing funding to change their lives are being what's referred to in the report as captured, client captured in SIL, inappropriate SIL accommodation. So yeah, I mean, I'm seeing the same thing, and I think that this is a big, it's a big win that this is happening, right? There's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of suggestion. To see it in a formal written document is a good thing. On top of that, guys, they have actually suggested 2 new supports to be provided to participants, which helps them increase their awareness and access to SDA. Yeah, so that lovely lady who was asking that question about what happens if I can't find a robust participant, probably what's happening is robust participants are looking for you and they can't find you. If they have a dedicated support officer to help them navigate through this SDA space and show them what's available, that's going to be a great thing to help, reduce that vacancy lead time, particularly on initial occupancy, and make sure that there's no conflict of interest. Sometimes you get an SDA provider who also owns property, and guess what houses they're going to fill first? Yeah, the ones that you presented to them to manage, or the ones that they own, right? So we live in the real world, The next thing, and this to me is the biggest and most important change in this entire review, is the suggestion that we should introduce a new SDA category called shared living. Yeah, this will at least double the pool of SDA and possibly a lot more than that. Really keen to see some details about this. Probably we'll have an extended discussion about this. I think Min found some great slides to give people an indication of what this might actually do to the SDA market. And lastly, there's been an acknowledgement finally that it's really, really hard to make sound investment decisions and be truly, and respond to participant needs, desires, feedback, because there just isn't the mechanism to do it. And so really putting in some fundamental foundational transparency and data sharing, I think will be a really good thing for us at SDA, right? Yeah, let's move on. So those are the 4 big themes, and we can unpack them in detail as people want to. Let's go to the next slide, Deb. And I guess this is the part this is the part when I read the review, what I was expecting to see based on the media was we're going to cut all the funding. Okay? If you look at what we just saw, I think SDA funding is going to at least triple as a result of this review. You've got more support coordinators, you've got more categories, you've got more of everything, right? And I just want to show people, even though the broader intention is to cut the NDIS budget, SDA is a subset of that, which will likely benefit from this. Min, before I carry on. Yes.
The word cut isn't accurate. It's to cut down the rate of growth of the increase of the NDIS. So the NDIS originally was supposed to be 20 billion a year. It's now forecast to be 42 billion this year, and it will reach 100 billion in 10 years' time. So we're not talking about cutting it from 42 down to 20 or 10 or 30. No, cutting the rate of growth. Yes, yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah. However, I also think that that's not true for SDA. I think the rate of SDA growth will double, if not triple. Yeah. And here's why and how. I just want to show people so that people understand the context of how SDA becomes our lives, right? So we think that that's the whole NDIS. I just want to show you how much of the NDIS budget is actually allocated to SDA, right? It's about $350 million. Now, if you imagine this chart here, that is the budget of $36.7 billion that was spent last year, right, on the NDIS, financial year 2020, end of financial year 2023, right? Of that, less than 1% was allocated to SDA, right? Only $350 million was spent on SDA. And just remember that by now we were expecting around 700 million of expenditure on SDA. So not only are we a tiny, tiny fraction of the budget, we are also nowhere near where they expected SDA to land in the first place, right? Min?
And that 750 million budget was based on 20 billion expenditure. So if we're reaching 40 billion or 100 billion, times by 2, times by 5 is the real number eventually.
Yeah. Yes. And here's the problem. Yeah. SIL expenditure right now accounts for 24% of all of NDI spending. $8.8 billion was spent on SIL. Yeah. And there was, in 2022, there was $1.4 billion of fraud. I don't know how much was in 2023. Presumably it was more than that. Because people got better at fraud and there was a bigger budget overall, but there's no data, they haven't shared any data on that. But I suspect that a significant amount of that is actually in the SIL funding. And that is what is being attacked in this scheme. Just think about the fraud. I mean, accommodation is so central to how people, the well-being of people, where they live, how they live is so important. Like, the rest of us spend 30, 40, 50% of our income on our houses, yeah, because we want to choose our location, we want to choose our amenity and all of these things. And less than 1% of NDIS funding is being allocated to SDA, yeah. 5 times that amount is just being wrought by bad actors. What they're trying to do is take money away from SIL, put it into SDA, because when people get into the SIL system, it's very, very easy to have fraud because there's no oversight. Debbie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the fact that I have a conversation about this very often with prospective buyers, and they ask, well, what happens if SDA is cut? And I think another way to look at it is that the benefits and the cost effectiveness of SDA are well understood within the NDIS, because once you've got participants moved out of the aged care system, out of hospital beds, already that is their $100,000 or $80,000 SDA funding is far less than the government is currently spending in the current situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. SDA is far cheaper than the alternative. Yeah, not to mention that when you it's very hard to commit fraud in SDA. Yeah, you think about it. You have to have a building. You have to have an enrolled building. You can't enroll a building twice. You can't. You have to have a private certification. There's only one participant that can access that house. Some of the stuff, by the way, that's going on in SIL is literally people will say they're doing a service and they just don't show up and do it. Right? Now, the participant doesn't necessarily complain because they don't really know what's going on. Someone came there, they were supposed to be there for 4 hours and they stayed for 2.5, and then they left. Yeah, now they still charge for the 4 hours. You can't really do that in SDA. So that's one of the other reasons they're trying to move away. They're trying to move more funding into SDA because of how well governed SDA already is and how much cheaper it is than putting people in hospitals, social accommodation, and all the other types of accommodation that people will have to otherwise live in. Yeah, good point, Deb. Let's go to the next slide. I think we've talked enough about the budgets. Min, you can explain this slide as you found it. Yeah.
Well, as we were preparing for the webinar, I found this only 30 minutes ago on LinkedIn from a consultant by the name of Joseph Cornellin from MC2 is a brand, and he's a consultant specializing in SDA. I mean, I didn't have time to unpack the contents here, but let's go through the numbers together, Angad.
Yeah, sure. So, by the way, this is in response to what we were talking about, that new category. Now, one thing that the NDIS talks about is the participants that have access to what they term as 24/7 living supports. Yeah. Now, for clarity, what that means is that an individual participant has a need for 8 hours of active support per day, and the balance at least passive. So they need 24 hours of support, minimum of 8 hours active. It can be more than that active, obviously, but if they need that, then they fall into this category called 24/7 living supports. Yeah. That market at the moment is around 41,000, which is about double the size of SDA. The people who do not qualify for SDA in that market are currently living in usually what's called SIL houses, right? Which is that closed system. And the recommendation to introduce that shared category is what this slide is referring to. What it would effectively do is mean that other 20,000 or so people that currently don't get SDA would all of a sudden now also have SDA funding. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And it would effectively mean that they would be living in a property that is managed by an SDA provider.
Correct. So that the SIL providers would have to separate this even for that base need. Now, I'm not familiar with the consultant that prepared this, although this is a fantastic slide. I just want to maybe just add a few opinions and what I think to be corrections or maybe ideas about this. So remember, when we're talking about the people that need accommodation, 24/7 living supports may not be the category that we're looking at. And the reason is this. What if someone needs 18/7? Or what if someone needs 24/7 support, but only 6 hours active? It's pretty reasonable to assume that they need accommodation too. Do you get what I mean? Now, that person who needs 6 hours active and the balance is passive support it's not captured in this 41,000. They don't meet that definition. However, I do think that they would, if you look at it reasonably, get some allocation towards their accommodation budget. So I don't know if 41,000 is the right addressable market. I think it could be a lot larger than that, possibly 3 or 4 times larger than that. And the balance of 13,000, I think that's just a typo. I think it should say 18,000. That would immediately become available or unlocked if 41,000 is the right number for this new shared living category. And if they do expand that shared living category to have people that are 18.7 or 16.5 or whatever the case may be, then that number could be a lot larger, which is where I expect it will actually land.
And can you go back and refresh quite some of the comments that you and I talked about in the podcast 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, in reference to those numbers and where you and I think where the IELTS will go, maybe to FA, that's being merged together, and then how the house, the bucket, we talk about the buckets, the funding in core sports or whatever, into the housing, home and living buckets. Let's talk about that concept there from the podcast we covered last time,
Yeah, so let's understand, and maybe what we can do is if we go to the next slide, I think we've got the topics of discussion. Let's just open up the free-for-all. Maybe the next slide, I think people can read that later. So look, guys, here's the big recommendations. Recommendation 8, which is to make housing and living supports more consistent, fair, and encourage more choice and control. And recommendation 9, which is to build a diverse and innovative range of housing and living options, yeah? So what we're going to be talking about now is really around, if you look at recommendation 9, topic 4, which is what's happening to SDA, the SDA categories overall. And if you put all the recommendations together, where do we think this is going to land? So yeah, let's talk about that. Some of that we've already done on the podcast, but let's refresh here. So the recommendations are: number 1, to remove IL, and number 2, to add a new category for what they call shared living. Yeah. Now, the basis of the recommendation to remove IL is that the funding for IL and FA is too close together. And an FA dwelling is so much superior to an IL dwelling. Why would we ever give someone that money for an IL when we could give them the same money for an FA? That's where this is coming from. It's a value for money thing. It's not that it's not a useful type of product. It's just that it's just doesn't feel value for money. Now, you could address that in a couple of ways. You could bump up the FA funding, which is one option, or you could bump down the IL funding, or what's being proposed here is, what if we create a new category, which would probably look similar to what IL looks like now, for all of those shared living people that currently don't get SDA funding at all. So my expectation is, if you meet the current criteria for SDA funding, which means you have extreme functional impairment or very high support needs, if you were this person, you were in the top 3.8% of needs in the NDIS scheme, you have a serious need, you would qualify for either FA Robust or HPS moving forward. Yeah. If you don't currently qualify for that, my speculation, I guess, is that you would then get put into what is the new shared living category. So IL will get replaced by SL, if you will, right? And that's probably what I think will happen. I think IL and FA will merge, and a new category will emerge. All of the ILs that are currently being built or don't qualify would essentially just fall into that category.
Can I also just put a point in there that, from my understanding, I think quite a lot of participants who get IL funding are more likely to actually need robust. So I guess it could go either way, into FA or into robust.
Yep. That's 100% true. Yeah, IL is a weird category in that way. Like, it's designed for intellectual and cognitive disabilities, but these occur so often with other disabilities. And if they are intellectually and cognitive disabilities, and they often have other dysfunctional behaviors. So it is this weird, it kind of feels like anyone could be better placed in robust or FA that has IL. And just because they have IL today doesn't mean they'll be IL forever. They may actually deteriorate. So it makes sense just to put them into FA straight off the bat.
Also, Angad, in the past, the NDIA was reluctant to give or stamp robust funding for participants because of the required care funding for their sports.
Yes.
Being 800 and 900 grand.
Yeah.
plus the fact that there is no such thing as a one tenant house out there, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times you see people being pushed into IL because they wouldn't, they end up, again, valuable money, cost cutting.
Yeah.
Don't want to approve the robust funding so easily, because we see so many stories online in the Facebook forum saying we asked for robust, we were not given robust at all, blah blah blah, because of funding costs. So you see a lot of robust participants who should be robust sitting in IL. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to expand on that, what was I going to say? The current IL participants that we have, we know that about 60% of them will turn into FA HPS as the disability gets worse. So you really have to wonder if it's covered by robust, it's covered in FA. What was the intention of IL? And you might remember how back in the day, like 5 years ago, they were expecting that maybe 70% of SDA would be IL. Yeah. And I think the reason is that when they envisaged SDA, they had initially envisaged that the people that are getting 24/7 living supports and possibly more will get access to SDA funding. I mean, just think this through. If the need for SDA to qualify for SDA, you need to have a extremely high functional impairment or a very high support need. Why would SDA even exist without an OOA? It makes no sense, right? So the fact that they had thought, oh, maybe you won't need an OOA for an SDA, leads me to think that maybe they had actually intended this in the beginning, and when they wrote the legislation, they realized that, hang on, that other big cohort of people that need accommodation just being missed, right? And so I get the feeling that may just be reverting back to what was initially intended.
Good point. Yeah.
I see we've got some questions from the audience. Should we start going through those? And by the way, guys, if anyone wants to talk about a particular topic, just write it in the questions and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. Well, shall I stop the screen share for now?
No,
Yeah, sure.
we missed the last slide, Debbie. That
I want to go back. That's right. This was the
Yeah,
text that went with this previous image. So we just popped that in. If you want to just run through that.
You want to read it? You want to read it, Debbie?
A third of expanded SDA to be shared living. The new lower cost shared living category of specialist disability accommodation may comprise a third or more of the restructured and expanded SDA program. The NDIS review identified that 41,000 participants receiving 24/7 living supports potentially needed housing assistance. These included 31,500 with supported independent living funding and 9,500 participants with high level of assistance with daily life. Broadly, the changes proposed in the NDIS review mean that the SDA will be grouped into continuing design categories, FA, HPS, robust, quarantined existing IL, which we've determined to be grandfathered, yet to be fully developed shared living. An analysis of previously published demand data from the NDIS pricing review indicates that around a third or more will be eligible for the new low-cost shared living category. This yet-to-be-designed category will be for participants sharing living supports who do not require the specialist design features of other SDA categories, but may require housing assistance. Part of its purpose is to stop the expansion of and possibly reduce closed system SIL homes operated by support providers. The timely and successful development of the shared living SDA category will be critical to the thousands of those eligible for it, as well as the efficiency and sustainability of the scheme itself. It will be a complex task. So this was by Joseph Connellan again on his LinkedIn feed. So yeah.
I think that's great. Yeah, I love what he's saying. I think he's right. It's interesting that he thought that maybe not all of the 41,000 would be eligible, which might explain the numbers on the previous slide. I wonder, I guess I'd like to have a chat with him actually. Maybe we can bring him on, show him, and chat about how he came up with that or what he's looking at to form that opinion.
Yeah.
We have a comment from Taryn Thompson from Adelaide. I could not agree more with this analysis as a general statement and see it as a huge step forward to regulated SIL, to be SIL as we define it, and now, or actually anyone needing supported independent living, i.e. those needing lesser than 24-hour supports, active or passive.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for
Great
that
comment,
comment,
Taryn. I
Taryn.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to see more comments from people.
I have a question for you or a comment from you. Here's the NDIS price review came out in July 1. The entire panel said except for the chairman, we want to remove group housing, legacy housing. They said that, right? And then in December, the NDIS 2.0 proposal says, well, we want to start renovating and retrofitting legacy housing. Why is there this confused contradiction here, Angad?
Sorry, say that again, Mick.
You know how in the price review in July, they said they actually want to see the removal of legacy group homes, right?
Yeah.
That was actually stated.
Yeah.
But yet in the review 2.0 in December, they're proposing this whole state governments and territories should fund renovations and retrofitting of group homes.
Sure.
Why this confused approach or comment from the government, please?
Yeah. So I think what so let's say this. There are two parts to this recommendation. One is that the government should refurbish or repurpose existing SDA, which doesn't necessarily mean they should fix it. That means they should do something, and maybe that means taking it off the market altogether. Yeah. There is another recommendation, which is that they should improve the quality of SDA in areas where the private market is not serving. Say, for example, in regional areas where there's one or two robust participants with extremely high forensic needs. Yeah. An investor, very unlikely an investor is going to invest in that market. It's just too much risk. But at the same time, people need the accommodation, right? So that's where the government should intervene. I think what that recommendation is getting to is two things. Number one, the collaboration between governments at different levels needs to be more deliberate and effective. At the moment, it's just being shipped around and passed around, and then these poor, I guess these group homes are just sitting in limbo without anything really happening. Yeah, I think if there's an impetus to repurpose them, potentially social housing, I think that's actually what they're going to suggest. And if they're in a location that SDA is already going to come up, then they'll probably be repurposed as social housing and taken off the SDA pool. If they're in a location where there isn't enough SDA already, then they'll probably be refurbished and kept as SDA. The government doesn't want to do SDA. They're not good at it. They don't. I mean, it's the whole point is to privatize that. Yeah. So I think that's what I think if you read that and the other recommendations, that's what it's getting to.
So can we maybe have a quick look through some of those recommendations, or do you want to go over to a few questions at this point?
I saw some questions in here, which I think are a good one. I've got one from Sheikh Udin. If currently in IL construction, what do you think is the safest option from here? We don't have enough to future-proof. So look, these are at this point recommendations, so that's important to understand. Now, I have not yet seen a recommendation that has not been adopted, so we should act as if they're going to be true. However, the timing of the implementation is not completely clear. If you have already started construction on IL house, it's probably not a terrible thing. There's still, depending on location and all the rest, I think that will still be okay. One option you may have is to at least upgrade some of the features such that you could comply with a robust category if required. Another option might be, if you could, is to see how that might work as an FA house. Now, that's not easy to do, and frankly, it might be impossible. If you are new and you are looking at this, you might have, our new plans that we issued straight after the review, we're now trying to build something that can comply across IL, FA, HPS with an easy upgrade and transition up and down that spectrum, right? I think if anyone is building now, you should really be looking at floor plans that are IL, FA, HPS compatible. And if, in a HPS, for example, there's a series of upgrades which are very easy to do when you're building and very hard to do later, such as putting beams in the roof so that you can support hoists. If you have to rip down ceilings to install that, it's a nightmare. Yeah. So do that stuff. Do that stuff up front. And if because it's not expensive either, a few grand kind of thing. The electrical upgrades, which are very expensive, can easily be retrofit, right? So what we're doing now and what we suggest everyone to do is look at ways that you can design dynamic floor plans that can across multiple categories, and then just pick your spec. so that you can easily roll up and roll down based on the category of participants you end up actually getting.
I think good point. We've got an anonymous attendee. I don't know if it's the same one, but there's a couple of posts. Is the IL category completely gone now? Well, as we were saying, no, not yet. And whatever is currently there, participants' properties will be grandfathered into the system, and participants, as was expected earlier, that do have degenerative conditions are likely to move up in their funding level anyway. Yes, Min.
I have had some private conversations with people the last 2 weeks who are pretty connected to the Canberra jurisdiction on SDA. I won't mention names or who or how, but I can say that, you know, the gossip to me, which I believe is accurate, is they're not going to remove IL. It'll probably be merged into FA or robust, depending on their disability, yes. But Canberra has said that, or NDIS has said in private conversations to other people who've linked it back to me, that there's too many people in the IL and they won't be able to remove them all, as in deleting them out of the system, no. And the IL category design will stay in its current form, or most likely in the merged form of FA. But there's no removal of IL per se, no.
Yeah, that's a good point. Remember, people have to live somewhere. Yeah, so they're not going to kick them onto the street, and likely the new shared living, even if they now IL will probably just backfill into that shared living category.
The other question by the anonymous attendee: considering the heavily legislated industry, how does one reassure themselves that an investment in SDA would be safe in the long term? I guess this goes back to what we were saying with the costing, the funding, it is such a tiny percentage of the NDIS budget, and it is being proven to be very cost effective. Angad, do you want to just reiterate on that too?
Yeah, I really love this question. I think it's a great question, and it shows that someone's really thinking about this. Now, anyone who tells you working with governments is no risk is an idiot, right? There is risk in SDA. You have to understand what you're walking into. Now, one thing I will say, and SDA, unlike NRAS, now you might remember NRAS, this is the National Rental Affordability Scheme, which was similar in a way, however, was eventually pulled. They're different in a certain way, which gives me personal confidence about NDIS and SDA. Firstly, you have to look at what's been happening in SDA and the NDIS broadly over the last decade, yeah? And what you'll realize is that everything is converging on a point. When you start to see a government act erratically, so they change this and then they change back and then they change this and they change back, I personally get very uncomfortable, because it means they don't know what they're doing, right? It means that they're going backwards and forwards, and they might one day just pull the funding. However, that's not what we're seeing in NDIS and SDA. What we're seeing is all of the recommendations are converging, and in many ways they're very predictable in what they're doing. So part of your risk mitigation is understanding the vision of the NDIS and making sure that whatever you're doing is aligned with that. Yeah, if you're doing that, I think that's probably the best thing. Just with regards to the SDA funding, SDA saves the government a ton of money. That's what you have to remember. Yeah, hospitals are ridiculously expensive. The purpose of SDA, they actually reduce funding that they would spend on core supports. If someone can get to the bathroom by themselves, now they don't need a carer all the time. So SDA is actually sustainable in that way. That's the other reason I personally have confidence in the longevity of the scheme. And I think if you're not trying to game the system, I think the government's the changes that happen in the future are going to align consistently with what you're trying to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Min.
The previous question from Sheik earlier, 2 questions ago, that you answered, he asked another question here. Thanks for answering my question. My understanding IL versus HBS. Building cost difference is about 50 to 100K, so upgrading would be very expensive. Yes, correct. I would say the difference in price is probably 100 to 150 grand, 130 grand. Over 100 grand, yes, to go from IL to HBS. So that is a fact. Now, me and Angad have talked about this a lot the last 2 years or so. I reckon, look, if you're short on funds and you don't have the budget to go the upgrade, and you can't pay the additional extras, maybe do some small changes to the IL house that make it almost suitable for an FA. No, almost suitable, meaning one room, one bedroom being wider, like 4x4, 5x5.
The wider doorways and hallways.
Wider doorways of that one master bedroom, wider hallways, wider front door. I mean, those small changes, well, those changes there are not that expensive to do, but it allows for the possibility of one FA or one wheelchair participant who may not be a SDA participant, by the way, could be a SIL participant in a wheelchair, one participant in a wheelchair to live in that IL house, possibly, because I do know you can bring in your FA funding into an IL house. It is possible out there. So that's one small change there to a design that could be possibly effective long term to a budget conscious investor. There you go.
Yeah. Great points. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to jump over to these recommendations and
we can
pick out a few of these?
There's one question here from Larissa, which I'll just answer. Larissa T has asked, what is the difference between buying off the plan versus an apartment versus completed? Now, that's a really great question. Not exactly related to the review. I think maybe Min, if you can pick that one up offline, there's probably a lot of there's probably a lot of people that have that, maybe done a podcast on it already. So I just wanted to let Larissa know that we've seen it, and Min, maybe you can handle that offline, and we'll try to keep the questions really focused on this review for this particular webinar. Cool.
Okay, we've just had Jim O'Mara has popped up. Hi, Jim. I've been told by my architect that council have a limit of 25 square meters per room. Is this correct?
That might be correct, depending on the council. So that if it's a council policy, it'll be to that specific council. Just a little tip. So remember, with councils, they have policies. Policies are not laws; they are guidelines. And ultimately, what you would have to do is engage a town planner to present a case as to why what you're proposing is reasonable. The types of things, when they have that policy, there'll be a reason why they have that policy. So say, for example, maybe they don't want to have micro apartments or something like that. So they've limited the floor space of each particular bedroom. If you're presenting a case to them that what you're creating is not that, then they may have some flexibility in those requirements. The person to talk to would be a town planner. Maybe they can give some guidance.
Angad, I want to give a different line of thinking. The SDA Build Design Guideline is federal. Correct. This is a small council here.
Yes.
I can't see when a council position would override the federal government's build guidelines. Yeah. So that whole 25 square meter thing, because council said so, I don't believe that is. Maybe the architect relayed the information to the council wrong. There's miscommunication there somewhere.
No, that is completely reasonable. It happens all the time. So this is one of the challenges of SDA, right? So you have SDA crosses over so many governments and so many jurisdictions. So that the government that is responsible for determining development applications is the local government. Yeah. And so the federal government cannot override the local government on a development application because it's in their jurisdiction. So what this person is saying might be completely correct. And the challenge is now you've got different layers of legislation that need to be navigated. Yeah. And they don't always talk to each other. So even with the SDA guidelines, right? The SDA guidelines do not align with the NCC perfectly. There's different requirements for disability accommodation in the NCC than there is in SDA, which makes no sense. They don't align with local council planning requirements. They don't align with state government land use policies. It is a challenge, but what we are experiencing is that the councils recognize this and they're quite flexible, provided they're presented with a case. You know what I mean? So we run into this all the time where the council will say something. We had one recently, actually, where they needed a double garage, which was not appropriate for this particular type of accommodation. Once we presented that case, we were able to reduce the double garage and increase some of the living area for the SDA. So yeah, it happens all the time, mate. And I feel your pain.
And I guess it also comes down to the fact that councils will often just look at these properties as being residential. Yeah. When they're not actually a residential house.
Yeah. And remember, when you talk to council, you're not talking to the council. You're talking to a junior officer who's been given the worst job to answer the phones, who doesn't know, who's probably been there for a year, doesn't know anything yet. Right? With respect, but what you're getting is a computer says no answer, and you need to just dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd like to pick out a few of these action points that I think are really worth more of a discussion. Okay, let's look at so recommendation 8, which was to fund housing and living supports that are fair and consistent and support participants to exercise genuine choice and control over their living arrangements. Now, this is something that we looked at and initially saw a number of 1 to 3. In general, reasonable and necessary funding should be based on an average shared support ratio of 1 to 3. And I know some people looked at that and went, what are they talking about? The SDA homes should be 3 tenant. And as we've looked into it in greater detail, that's obviously not the case. And I think that, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Angad?
Yeah, for sure. This is a interesting recommendation because it's not directly relating to SDA. It's talking about shared living supports. The actual recommendation, the center of the recommendation, is to change how the funding is allocated. What they want to do is, the main thing that they're trying to do is, number one, make it consistent. So right now, as I mentioned, there was a case in the news where I think they were twins, or maybe they were brothers or something, with basically the same needs, got very different plans. They're trying to eliminate that because it's obviously ridiculous. Yeah. So what they're trying to do is to have a more consistent and transparent funding process, so that the same people get treated the same, if that makes sense. That's the first thing. The second part of this recommendation is that the way SDA funding is currently allocated is it's what's called a capital support. It goes into someone's SDA bucket, and they can either use it for SDA or they lose it, and they cannot take any other budget from any other category that they maybe don't need to use or they don't want to prioritize. They cannot allocate that to their SDA. What this recommendation is suggesting is that people should instead be given a provisional budget that then they can then apply with more flexibility.
This is what I really wanted to get into this point, because I think this is game changing for SDA. It
is game changing for SDA, right? Now, what they're saying is, how do you then determine what these provisional budgets should be? Yeah. And what they're suggesting is, number one, we have to consider that housing arrangements and shared support are not the same thing, right? Someone can live independently and share support between 3 people. That, you know, there might be three villas in a complex, for example. Right? It's not the same. And so allowing someone a shared living support budget that they can allocate as they see fit, which is generally allocated on a 1:3 ratio, which is already the case, by the way, no changes there. That now someone can be a bit more flexible with.
How does that actually work, Angad? If we look at the funding, are you saying that if they come to an SDA property and apply as a tenant and they are bringing $60,000 of SDA funding, but the owner of the property, to make his investment viable, is looking for, 2 participants with $80,000 of funding?
Yes.
He can bump up his 60 with another 20 from his other funding areas.
Yeah. So just like you and I might prioritize our accommodation over an international holiday or something like that, right? We don't live with a fixed budget. This is how much we spend on rent, and this is how much we spend on groceries, and this is how much we spend on movies. We don't, we do to an extent, but not really, right? If one day we want to spend a little bit more on our house, and we want to, as a result, not eat out as much takeout, we have the right to do that. Do you get what I mean? And accommodation is the thing that really, really changes people's lives. It really does. So it's completely reasonable that if someone really loves a house, that they will prioritize that accommodation over something else that they may not get as much therapy sessions or something, right? And they're free to make that choice. So yeah, that's the intent of it. And what's interesting is that you can't do the reverse. So they're not allowing you to take living budgets and put them somewhere else, but you can add to the living budgets, right? Yeah. The practice of it is interesting though, yeah, because how do you in practice, and this has been the big challenge of mandating separation between SDA and SEAL, how do you actually share supports without also sharing a house, right? And this is where, they're introducing a new role, and that role is called a shared support facilitator. And the idea is that 3 guys, 3 people can get together, wherever they live or however they live, they can still share support through one SDA or SIL provider, but maybe across 2 dwellings or 3 dwellings or something like that, or even in 1 dwelling, but now they're driving. It's kind of like a tenant union or something. Yeah. And then they can, as a collective, engage someone to do their supports. So that's how they're proposing that they're going to address this mismatch, which right now, the only way you can share supports with 3 people is by living with 3 people. Whereas now they're trying to create new and innovative ways and facilitating the funding as well as a role to administer that, how people might be able to live more independently in 2-person households, which we know is a strong preference, and share 3-person SIL funding.
Absolutely. So rather than spend too much more time on recommendation 8, because you've gone on over most of those action points there now, I think we'll move into recommendation 9, which is deliver a diverse and an innovative range of inclusive housing and living supports. Okay, this touches on all sorts of things, and the first few are about, well, firstly, there was the bundling of the shared supports, but also better data. And that is something that we are all for.
Excited about that.
Definitely, yeah. And why do we need better data? Because what we're currently getting is firstly quite old data. It comes out every quarter, 6 to 7 weeks in arrears. So we're looking at data that is, you know, definitely not current. The data is very broad over large areas. Some of it is broken down into SA3s, but some of it is only at the SA4 level. We're not talking about that. That is statistical areas, the ABS statistical areas. And some of those areas can cover populations of up to 500,000. So, you know, that doesn't break it down, especially when we're looking at pipeline data of dwellings being delivered. Also, what we're not getting at all is what funding participants actually have that are in the system. We know maybe what kind of a property they're living in, because we know how many properties are enrolled and how many rooms are in those properties, and we know what they're looking for. The few participants in the system that are shown or known as actively seeking, we know what they're seeking, but that is a pinch compared to the whole SDA funded participant pool. So we just don't know that data.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it would be great to know. It'd be great to know more. And I think the introduction of the housing navigator, who is the concierge for SDA participants to explore the SDA market and see what's available for them, and really has no dog in the race, which I think is great. You know, they're not addicted. They're not, addicted, I say, but they're not affiliated with any particular provider. They're not affiliated with any particular property. They get nothing more, nothing less based on whichever the participant chooses. I think that particular role, and seeing from that person's lens, what do people actually want? You know, at the moment, I feel like the advice and the feedback that we get, sometimes we get it direct from participants, but very often if we're talking to carers or organizations, what they're telling us is through a lens of their own bias, either deliberately or inadvertently. And I think just seeing someone who all they want to see is a good outcome for participants, and then giving us feedback on that basis would be great to see, right? I mean, every SEAL provider tells you that people want 3 participant homes, right? Which is, we know that's not true. But why does every SEAL provider think that 3 people is the right number? Because they're seeing it through their lens. That's how they can deliver the most effective care, and they seem to have people happy. But that's not necessarily the whole truth of it. I mean,
I had a SEAL provider in my office the last 3 days, and I was just in her office the last 5 days last week in Sydney. She said that in their SEAL home, their ideal perfect number is 5-bedroom.
Yeah.
1 carer and 4 participants. And I said, why? She said, well, their profit margin for carer plus 3 SILs, we're not talking SDA here, we're SIL only here, 1 to 3 is about 200 grand margin for the business. But the 4th one coming in, so carer plus 4, is not 200 grand margin. So their margin goes from 200 grand to 400 grand profit for the year by having that 4th participant in there. So that's why they want more in there. And that's a group home.
She also iterated, though, that it really only works when there is some form of separation with those properties. So they've got some SDAs that have 2 participants on one side, two bedrooms on one side, sharing a double-way ensuite, 2 on the other side. And basically the dwelling is almost like a duplex. It's kind of, kept
It's
separate. So they've
large.
got their own separate living areas. So it's kind of like two living in one part of the house, two living in the other, and they don't really
Right.
come together.
Yeah,
So
this is
she
a very good.
acknowledged, yeah, she also acknowledged that it's very difficult to get more than two participants living together that can be happy living together, and three is much more
Impossible.
complicated.
And Angad, I sent you the photo of the garage. The garage was used as an OA office.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the whole garage was storage, supplies, three
Filing
massive desks,
cabinets.
4 computers, filing cabinets. The garage was the OA. That's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think, look, that type of innovation is what we want to see, right? Now we know, and you know, when we do our packages, often a provider will say, look, I really need 4 in that estate. Can you give me 4, right? So that I can make it work. Right? We say, cool. We're not going to put them right next to each other, but maybe we put 2 and 2. And it's, if you think about it, it's actually exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly.
We're building 2 houses that are close by and 2 houses somewhere else that are close by.
Yeah.
So that, you know, they can still get the economy of scale, but without necessarily sharing a house.
Yeah,
This
and
is
in
exactly
fact,
where I
this
think it should go.
provider also said that that would be a preferred option than having a 4-tenant house that is partially separated.
There you go. So I mean,
Yeah.
this is great affirmation that we're on the right path. You know, and I think that is this provider that you're talking about sounds really great. Like, you know, some providers are really great, and we know we bag on still providers a bit from time to time. But the truth is, there are a lot of good ones, and there are a lot of ones that really care about their participants and they're doing their best. Now, this is though what
she has 8 or 9 houses SDA in Sydney, 9 in Brisbane, and 8 in Newcastle. So she actually runs a SIL business.
Yeah,
with 500 staff and 80 participants, right, across those three areas. And she's a specialist, SIL specialist in the SDA market. Yeah, so she knows her thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, just on that, like, this is interesting though, right? Now, you've heard it from a SIL provider, how their margins look when they add those in this shared living. Now, I think the 200K is not net profit. I think that's after they make a profit on their SIL service. That's the extra over. Is that right, Min? Yeah.
I'm assuming that 200 grand is the net margin, because if you have 3 participants in that house already, they're shared funding. That'll be about 800 grand right there for those 3 already.
No, but the reason I'm telling you this is, so in the NDIS review, the way that they're planning on funding this shared living category is by taking away some of the SIL funding and putting it into SDA funding. So that's how they're proposing to pay for shared living, because they recognize that in the SIL funding that these people are receiving, they have what's called an implied capital support. So they're being funded. They know that the SIL provider has to provide the house, and that's kind of bundled up into their SIL package. What they're saying is, if we separate that out and put it there, now what you've got is an indication. If a SIL provider is telling us 200K on top, right? And remember we were saying that what was an old IL? We were saying it probably landed about 50, 60K per person, which is about 100, 120K, and the SIL provider makes a margin. So this is kind of making sense. I think that the accommodation that they allocate for that, the budget might be around 50 to 60,000 per person, and the balance would still be kept in the SIL. So taken out.
I have a question for you and for our listeners to be aware of. You told me the answer. The question is this: how many support workers do you think each house requires?
You asking me? I'd say about 4 or 5.
14, my friend. 14 support workers per house.
Really? Wow.
Think about it. 500 staff, 80 participants.
Yeah. I saw those numbers, but
14 per house is the carers. So going back to this question here from an anonymous attendee, she had 4 questions. In the HPS SDA, how do you reckon 2 participants can live with 1 carer? And I said to her, what do you mean by 1 carer? She goes, no, it's 1-to-1. I said, no, it's not 1-to-1. It could be 4-to-1, 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-1. And she said, oh, okay, but physically, it's not feasible for a single nurse to look after more than 1 or 2 participants. Debbie, can you respond to that question, please? Knowing what I just said about the 14 for the house. Okay? Yeah.
They might have 1-to-1 care, but that will be split over various shifts. And the other participant in the house might also have that. So there won't be 1 single nurse. There will be multiple carers on site. There may only be 1 or 2 overnight in the OOA, on site overnight supports. But during the day, you're going to have a number of different carers working in the property, looking after each of those participants, depending on their individual requirements for support.
I went into her house in Cessnock, Maitland, Newcastle region, Hunter Valley, and there were 3 carers in the house for the 2 participants I saw.
We've got a great question from Blake McFarlane here. Just on recommendation 8, you wouldn't recommend structuring housing developments floor plans for a 3-tenant based on shared support ratio. If participant budgets can be used more freely, doesn't this incentivize tenants to seek more affordable SIL provisions, which would still be 3-to-1 ratios? That's a really great question. That's really great. Like, I think this is where we are getting confused. You can have 1 to 2 SDA or shared living and 1 to 3 SIL, right? There are some SIL services like direct care. There are other SIL services like shopping, cleaning, those kinds of things. Yeah. So you got to understand it's not just one thing. The recommendations are allowing more flexibility and more separation of those types of funds. So what I think we should be doing is we should be looking very closely at what participants are asking for. Look, you heard it from a SIL provider just before. When you start to get like 2 people is manageable. When you start to put 3 people in direct, like close together, they start to fight, right? Like there's a high degree for conflict. Compatibility is not so easy to manage. You get vacancy. The valuers in WA, I don't know if this is true for the rest of Australia, but they discount the valuations on SDA, on 3 participant SDAs by 30% for their income, because they see that 1 bedroom just sits vacant the entire time. I've seen so many people building 3 participant homes and they just convert the 3rd room to a living area because it's just useless, right? So I don't know the answer whether we should be building 3 participant homes. My instinct is no. What we should be doing is understanding that we have to bridge this gap. The need for privacy and independence of a participant and the need for economies of scale from a SIL provider. And I think the way that we do that, the way that we do that is like, a couple of houses nearby and that kind of thing. I suspect that will be the way that we have to solve this challenge. It is a challenge. I don't think 3 participant homes, I feel like if we start building 3 participant homes, we're going backwards. We used to do it, we stopped doing it. I don't know. And the reason we stopped doing it is because participants don't want it. So unless it's like a massive block, we're doing some 3 participant homes, but they're massive, like 500 square meter blocks with 3 really big rooms completely separated in the house. So unless you've got that type of arrangement, I think you've got to respect the participants' needs first. That's my thoughts. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, Min.
Well, we're at the mercy of the NDIA approving 2-to-1, or 3 to 1.
But that's the SIL though, right? For SIL and SDA separately.
Yeah. I'll answer the question in a second, right? Give me a second here. At the very start of the whole journey for participant, you got to go for the plan writer, submit to the NDIS, go with the OT reports, the physiotherapy reports, the psychology reports, the doctor's reports, approve or not, back and forth, then goes approve, go to LAC, electrical area coordinators, plan managers, before they're released out of maybe hospital or nursing homes, nurses, approvals, OTs, NDS coordinated in the hospitals. We're at 10 people already. And then you go to the SIL provider and the care supports and the SA provider. That's like 12 people, right? Just to get them out of the hospital there, right? So it all goes back to what is the NDIS approving? Is it 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-1? That's based upon their medical needs, right? So we're at the mercy of the NDIS, the system, in giving the right funding. And sometimes people want their 1-to-1 in the apartment rejected. They want to be 3-to-1. 3-to-1, fine. But then they don't want to share with anyone else. And then you go to a 3-to-1 house, but there's only one anchor tenant. There's no other tenants. All right. It's a lot of variables here. And then is it cost effective for a SIL business to run a house in the middle of nowhere with 1 or 2 participants only? Do they want the 3rd participant? It's a lot of factors here which we don't control, and it's all out of our control, really, up to the circumstances of the situation. And it's all variable. Yeah.
So what do you think? At the center of Blake's questions is, should we do 3 participant houses? What's your thoughts on that?
The answer is yes and no, which is not a real answer, because you have here's an example right here, right? I have a client with you, Natasha, who did a 3-bedroom HPS with only one living space there. And she spoke to another provider who said, estate provider, 2-bedroom plus OOA is 3-bedroom all up.
Yeah.
And the estate provider said, oh, you should have 2 living areas, right? So now she's trying to come back to the funder, you, the designer. Well, I want to add another second living space here because I was told from the provider that I should have one to create space. Lo and behold, the block's too small to do that, right? So in theory, it's ideal to have a 2-tenant resident SDA home with the carer and at least 1 living space, right? Is a second living space appropriate? Probably, if you have the space.
Yes.
So what's the solution? What's the solution there? Well, the 4th bedroom. That 4th bedroom is either a 4th bedroom or a media room.
Sure, I get it.
And there it is, right there.
Yeah.
It's up to the on-site SIL provider to decide: can these 2 participants accommodate a 3rd one in a compatibility sense? One, they may want one, or if they don't, we turn that 4th bedroom, the 3rd bedroom, sorry, the spare room into a media room to be. So it's a flexible environment there. There it is. And lastly, the SIL provider may want to use that spare bedroom as a temporary short-term STA, MTA room for short-term bookings or emergency transitional participants in and out very quickly. So that allows the SIL provider to work with the team on the tenants on site, with the estate provider, with the local needs of the community, with the investor, keep that scenario flexible. Having that one empty, fine. I think that's the answer. The answer is if the investor can afford it, they can leave it empty and then it's empty there. But sure, why not? That's all.
Let's so the gist of it is build the best SDA that you can in the location that you have, I think is the take home message. To give you a bit more detail about this particular project that Min's talking about is in a really top-notch location, premium location in Western Australia. And in that location, you can only get blocks of land that are so big. And we know that there's a provider very keen on that particular area. What we've done is we've used the design that we have. We've made the bedrooms quite large, much larger than required to facilitate, they can still spend time in their bedroom. Each bedroom still has a private courtyard. And once we make the bedrooms really nice and the living areas really nice and the private courtyards, we don't have a lot of space left over. Yeah. And that was what we thought. And, the alternative is, well, what if we make the bedroom smaller? And that doesn't feel like a good idea because now you have a claustrophobic bedroom. So SDA is all about making compromises as well and making the right compromises. Location is very important. If you are going to have that 3rd bedroom, I think Min's take on this is very important. If you are having a 3rd bedroom and you plan on using that as a participant bedroom, you must have a second living area. If you're having a 3rd bedroom, that is effectively the second living area, that's probably okay. Putting 3 people in like a small house where there's too much congestion is not a nice way to live, and you will get a lot of vacancy.
Yeah. Oh, I think that answers that.
Does that answer Blake's question then?
Hopefully that
you think?
does.
Hope so. Blake, let us know if you've got any follow-up questions. Cool.
Yeah. All right. I want to go back to the recommendations, action point 9.4. We've talked about the IL category being replaced by a new category. They also talk about examining whether the HPS, FA and robust categories are fit for purpose and enable delivery of best practice and cost-effective living supports. Now, in your notes, Angad, you have said that the design review is already in place, announced mid last year. We know that we're waiting on updated design guidelines. You say expect big changes in robust, which we are definitely expecting. You want to just talk a little bit more to that and
Sure.
whether you see anything changing in the other higher levels? Yeah,
sure. Look, so just to let you know, when they released the NDIS guidelines, there was a planned review for 5 years, which is this year. So this is there's nothing new here that they should do a review. They had already, in the background, all the SDS certifieds, they had already sent them a message saying, hey, listen, guys, we're not going to release any more. What they were doing is releasing clarification notes for certain questions that SDA certifieds had. They said, we're not going to do any more clarifications. We're doing a full review next. So this is the last clarification they were issuing. After this, we're going to do a full re-release of the guidelines. I don't expect there'll be major changes to HPS and FA. I think they're working quite well. There may be some changes to IL. which we're hearing about. There may be the new category of shared living, which is introduced. And robust, if you read the guidelines, like robust is so vague. like so many things can get approved for robust that are just not robust enough anyway, right? And I think that there's a big push for, can you give us some clarity as to what actually is robust, right? Rather than saying a robust fixtures without any spec or detail around what constitutes a robust fixture. So I think there's going to be some big changes with that. I think robust is really underfunded at the moment. And I hope that they recognize that maybe part of that is because when you price it, the builder just specs normal stuff without realizing it's not fit for purpose. So I think that's what's going to, that's going to be a big change. And I'm really looking forward to that design review overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all are. One more thing I wanted to touch on in these action points was the pricing. Now, we did mention that earlier on, and this review came on the back of the SDA 5-year price review, which was undertaken by an independent panel commissioned by the NDIA. They're now recommending here that the Australian government should transition responsibility for advising on SDA accommodation, SDA pricing, to the Independent Health and Aged Care Pricing Authority, IHACPA, and introduce more flexibility to the way prices are set. I mean, I looked at that first, I thought, well, are they saying that the independent panel did a bad job? Because we thought it was, well, in most cases, a really good update to the pricing review. Wasn't perfect by any means. What was your take on that, Angad?
On the recommendation or the pricing review?
Well, both.
Yeah, look, I think, they make that the good thing is they're quite transparent with how they arrive at the pricing review. Now, one thing to remember is that when they give you the pricing review, if the NDIA could wave a magic wand, what they would do is every single SDA would achieve the same return on cost. Yeah. What they're trying to normalize and adjust for is the differences in the cost bases of the different types of dwellings and the different types of locations. Yeah. They're not trying to direct you through incentive where to build necessarily.
Yeah.
So that's important to understand. As a builder, I can tell you that they made some merit mistakes with build costs. Yeah. The cost of robust is too low. The cost of IL is probably too high. Hence, you see that reflected in the funding. The cost of fire sprinklers, which is not enough to cover the fire sprinklers still, even though it's been bumped up. They've assumed everything is class 3 and they've based the funding on that. Yet we know that, we're doing everything class 3, but I think everyone else is still building class 1, and they're just basically pocketing the extra 150K. I don't know how they're doing it, right? So those types of things, I think the price review had left some to be wanted. Moving this, so again, to understand some of the background, remember we've just had that major the Aged Care Royal Commission, yeah, because the same things that are happening in SDA.
The Disability Royal Commission.
There was an aged care one as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the same thing, right? You give human beings this type of incentives, they tend to behave this type of way. This is why we can't have nice things, right? So what happened was they did the major Royal Commission in aged care to find out what's going on, and out of that was this body that came out, so that is now the independent body to price aged residences. Yeah. Now, if you think about it, that department is far better resourced to take on the pricing of SDA than creating a new department that is trying to figure it out for the first time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So consolidating, I think, is a good thing. Yeah, definitely a good thing. You don't need two departments which are just there to price houses using more or less the same methodology. It would be better to be consolidated. I love the idea of flexibility in pricing, because, as you know, the SA4 areas are too broad.
Way too broad. I was going to touch on that and ask your thoughts on the location factors.
Yeah. So you've got in Perth, for example, the southeast has some of the cheapest land and some of the most expensive land. Right? So depending on, you get these massive swings in an SA4. So you're in a premium location right on the river in the southeast, your return on investment might be 8%, less even. You're in one of the cheaper areas in the southeast, you might be getting 25% return. Now, that's not fair for the investors. It's not fair for the participants. It really discourages investment in those locations. So it needs the capacity to price with a sense, sensibly based on what is in front of you, I think is awesome. I don't know how they're going to administer this, whether it's an application process, I don't know if when they do this, are you going to be able to do this before you develop the property? How are they going to assess costs? Are they going to expect you to put forward a building contract, or are they going to have their own assessment? In principle, great idea. Mechanically, it would be interesting to see what they plan to do though.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, we've got a question here from Jenna Patterson. Due to these possible changes in the future, is it worth waiting until these have been approved before purchasing an SDA property? Min, would you like to answer that?
Most of the investors will go HBS anyway now, FAHBS. They're going to go that way. So that question only relates to the IL investors. And the IL investors are the ones who are budget conscious, which are $700,000 to $750,000 price points. Okay, if you can afford to do $850,000 to $950,000 price range for SDA, which is going to be HBS or FA anyway, you go now.
Yeah,
because if you wait,
the prices are going to go up.
Prices of a land will go up, price of a bill will go up the next year or 2 or 3 years anyway. So you can wait a year, but you pay an extra 40 to 50K more in costings next year because of the price increase of everything. Yeah. So the secret to SDA success is speed to market. Speed to market as an investor, speed to market as a builder or developer delivering the product for you to go to market, fill it up straight away. Because the longer you wait, the more competitors, being other investors going in before you, and they snap up all participants for you. So you end up at the back of the line, which means you get minimal access to participants in the chosen area, wherever that is. Yeah.
I'll just add to this. Yeah. So depending on where you are and the locations and everything, like the market growth in WA is bonkers at the moment. I think the stats were released in January this morning. I think it was either 1.6 or 1.9% increase in January. That's a 20% increase in property prices, median house prices, when you annualize that. Yeah, that is wild. We are seeing land disappear so quickly. First home buyers, because the rents are so expensive, first home buyers are just buying anything because owning a house is now cheaper, even with interest rates, than where the rents are going, plus the security of having your own place, right? So what we're seeing is there are some people who would want to hang back as a result of these recommendations. And if that's the view that you form, I think that can be wise. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily, if you're not comfortable, hang back. This is a 20-year scheme. We're going to be here for the long term. So, don't feel pressure if you're not comfortable. At the same time, when you're buying, the difference between an IL and a normal house in terms of cost is not that much, right? It might be 50, 60K, what you would pay for a normal house anyway. And if you like the way that we design our houses, there's always a capacity to upgrade later. So we can achieve those 750 to 800K budgets. It is an IL house. However, if in a year, all you need to do is upgrade the electricals, that's quite easy to do, right? So those opportunities still exist. And you might be able to pick up some of the capital growth that's occurring in the background of the market anyway. Not saying that you should jump in if you're not comfortable, but if you're feeling like maybe you could also make a case that the market growth is in a way de-risking the SDA because the rents are increasing, the property values are increasing, everything else is giving you this upward pressure. And because land is not readily available, it is quite difficult to bring new supply to the market in WA. Now it's becoming harder and harder.
If you make a decision in a year from now, you always have to wait for titles registration.
Yeah. Yes.
And construction, which is another year. So the 2-year product delivery right there.
Yeah.
And look at the bubbles. And Debbie, 2 years ago, the prices were 200 grand less.
200,000 less, absolutely.
Yeah. So you'll probably see the prices go up a lot, I think.
Yeah.
Especially
certainly, I hope not that much, but they will definitely go up.
20% a year is no joke. I've never seen the Perth market do this. Never.
If you wait 2 years, your prices go up by at least 100 grand more. Yeah. That's one. Yeah. And the pool of participants, tenants, decreases. That's also a risk there.
Depends on that recommendation.
Yes.
Just one more thing to add is you said about titles. Yeah. So we've got some clients who are now, to get good quality blocks, are even waiting till October. The ones that are coming up now, the land, like we're securing land that's titling in March at the very earliest, and usually around June, July. We don't like with SDA, quality is really important, quality of location. So you don't want to get a cheap block in a cheap location, even if it's available now, if that's next to a loud train station or something. Like, it's worth waiting a month or two to get the right type of block. Because remember, this is a 20-year thing. You don't want to be making a decision that's a 20-year decision because you're worried about a 6-month timing difference. You know what I mean?
Can I just butt in and change the subject slightly? You're talking about this 20-year scheme. I just want to clarify for people that think that the scheme started in 2015, it's going to be over by 2035. No, the 20-year relates to the age of the property. Once the house or the dwelling is certified as an SDA property, your property will have a 20-year lifespan.
Yeah.
So just wanted to clarify that in case.
Yeah, good clarification. You've got to think long term, and 20 years from the time that you build it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
There's a really good question, and only Angad can answer it, not me or Debbie.
Yeah. I'm coming across dodgy real estate agents selling rubbish in oversaturated areas and people still buying them. Is the NDIA doing anything about this? I think this destroys confidence in the sector. I'm hearing sad stories. More accurate data will help. What a great question. Yeah. Look, to be honest, the data sucks. So I don't trust the NDIA data at all. I remember when we were looking at some of our own SDA investments, we went to an area and it showed no participants, and then I met with a sale provider and they showed me 40 participants in their own houses right now that would qualify. So I have no idea where they get this data from. So that's a problem for sure. There are obviously bad actors in the space, and whenever there's a property boom, you can expect just as many spruikers show up. And yes, there is a risk of oversaturation in certain areas, especially the cheaper areas. Whenever we're talking to people, we're trying to say, look, you could get something for 700, but do you want a 700? Do you want it in that location that it's cost you 700 as an SDA? It is very much buyer beware. And I don't know how one goes about without being educated and talking to seal providers, SDA providers, property developers, talking to people in the space. I don't know how one mitigates that risk.
But Angad, to the newbie investor coming into the space, they don't know where to go to clarify information. Like, most of the time, seal providers don't even understand SDA. SDA buyers are too busy to answer phone calls. Builders will sell you anything they want to sell. And the agents, they may not be bad actors. They may be just innocent actors who have no idea themselves.
That's true as well. Yeah.
So the lack of clarity or transparency in this world of SDA doesn't help investors navigate it properly. No.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if we've answered the question or more just empathized with the anonymous attendee that asked it, because it's true. The NDIA does absolutely nothing about saturation. That's the whole point of privatizing the sector. I think what they'll do is, if it does get saturated, then the benefit is that all these will now turn into shared living. And people will use them in that way.
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one. And yes, there are rubbish products being delivered in rubbish areas and oversaturated areas. I guess the question in to ask yourself is, put yourself in the participant's shoe. Would you want to live in one of those cheap areas yourself? Are there facilities? Is it desirable? Is there transport? Is there shops? Is it near to medical facilities? If it's not, then maybe it's not a great location.
Yeah.
And at this point in time in the SDA market, we're seeing that, yes, there is a lot of development, a lot of saturation in areas, and you've got to spend the money now to go to a better area and build a better product.
Agreed. Yeah. And that's actually a really good point. Remember, this is a competitive market. So you're competing with other SDA investors. So if you do a spreadsheet exercise and you figure out, if I buy the cheapest land and build the cheapest 3-bedroom house with one living area and no sprinklers and everything else, then I can make a 25% return or whatever it is. If that's what's informing your strategy, you're probably going to run into trouble, right? I've seen some product in these oversaturated areas, and a lot of it's crap, right? So it's not. I don't know if it's going to be as much of a problem for the good quality properties as it is for other properties. So I know some people have built these IL only houses with 3 rooms that you just literally cannot use for anything else. And I know other people that have built really beautiful large properties, large bedrooms, sprinklers, and all the rest in similar areas, and I suspect that they'll do a lot better. And
that is true. So even if it's in a not a great area, if you're building a really good product, yours will win out over any others because it's just better. And with the choice and control, a participant will move to something that suits them better.
And now they'll have an advocate that will literally help them do that.
If investors follow the triple D process, DDD, you'll be fine. Design, desirability, and data. So break that down further and you understand it, because there's a question here from Kumanan. What is considered as a good location? I have a development potential land in Toowoomba, about 1.7 kilometres from the main mall and 1.5 kilometres from the hospital. Toowoomba is 2 hours west of Brisbane CBD. Small town, about 100,000 people there. Look, location sounds okay, good. I mean, it's a small town, so you're close to everything anyway, but design. Is it designed correctly? Is there space, living spaces? Is there space inside and around? Is it desirable location? Is it a desirable product you're creating? It's a DDD, and doing the data research as well. So that's all I can say for that.
And just on an area like Toowoomba, just to point out, that was one of the very first areas in Queensland that introduced SDA as a trial. Toowoomba and Townsville were the 2 main centres. So there was a lot of early development in there, and back in the day when people didn't really know what would work in terms of design. And so there are probably, unfortunately, some substandard properties existing in Toowoomba. So if you do build, even if it's in an area that's relatively saturated in Toowoomba, if you're building a really high-end product, really high-end residence dwelling, you won't have a problem.
And maybe one more thing to add. I don't know anything about Toowoomba, so I can't comment on the location. But one thing that we have generally noticed is that the provider matters a lot. Like, we will see a provider who in a given market can perform and another provider in the same market who cannot perform. It's not just about whether there's participants there. How good is the provider's marketing? How good is the service that they're providing? How active are they in engaging participants? How proactive are they in marketing your property? There's like so much to it. Because the providers are actually amongst themselves competing for market share, if you think about it. That's a competitive space too. So I think that the person to ask that to would be actually some SDA providers. And if the SDA provider says, listen, we love that location, we want that location, that's how I would judge it's a good location more than any other single variable.
Good point, Angad. Thank you. Look, I've sort of scanned through all those action points in your document, which, just to reiterate, everyone will get a copy of after the webinar. Nothing else I wanted to really bring up at this point. I don't know if there was any other things you wanted to touch on, and we've got a few questions left from Mona to talk about. Did you want to?
No, look, I think we've talked for 90 minutes. I think that this and the podcast gives you 2.5 hours of us.
One last question there. One last question for Perth. How much do you think a good robust design house with 2 participants in Perth will cost us to build?
How much do you think a good robust with 2 participants in Perth will cost us to build? Look, I think the build itself will probably land at around, if it's a 2-person house, I don't know if 2-person house robust is a good idea. Maybe I'll just qualify by saying that, because the only typology that we've really seen succeed is a 1-person villa in robust. 2-person can work, but then you'll get a lower need.
Yeah, we hear anything from 80% to 90% or more of robust participants can't share.
Yeah, so maybe if it's 2-person, IL is a better outcome. Gut feel, it would cost, if you wanted a decent location, you'd probably end up spending around 300 for the land, and maybe anywhere between 520 and 650 for the build, depending on what we do with it, right? So what does that work out to be? You can do the math. Maybe 750 to 950 would be a range for that type of product.
850, I think.
850 to 950.
5, 6, 850 to 950, yeah. So
And
not a lot different from a high physical support, really.
No, robust is probably more expensive than high phys, yeah. Like robust.
And you don't get the returns.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a
So
shame.
maybe when the next pricing review comes out, they will actually address the inconsistencies with that and robust funding.
Yeah. We got a question from Jenna Patterson as well.
Do we have the ability to speak with SIL providers to understand their needs and demands before we build in a particular area? The answer is yes and no. Okay. Yes, if there is a SIL provider in the area. So right now, we don't know where you're going yet, Jenna. Are you saying Perth? Are you saying Sydney? Or are you saying Melbourne? That's the first question. So we don't know where you're going yet. Sometimes creating stock from a builder, developer, and our side, we're sourcing and finding areas of demand. We may not have found the SIL provider yet because our focus is land acquisition and design and pricing first and foremost, because that's how it works, isn't it, Angad? I mean, it's very rare to have a SIL provider saying, we have this sprint ready now. What can you build for me in the next 2 months? Because the process is a year and a half right there. So
they can't do that. Yeah.
And
But
I think
what
it's
I will
also,
say,
oh, go on, Angad.
yeah, so the way this is really important right now. Some of the challenges if you're a one-off investor is that no one really wants to talk to you because you're too small, as a player for an SDA or a SIL provider to engage with. What we do, and this has been part of the journey, is we essentially have a panel of providers, and we try to talk to them and get feedback from them. We have a meeting with them every couple of weeks, get some feedback on where they'd like to be, where their demand is, get some feedback of where they don't want to be anymore, right? Because now we're seeing as that saturation happens, they're like, no more here, please. We've got enough there. More here, please, right? So we are engaged in those conversations. And I think that if anyone is trying to do this in a sincere way, having a small panel of providers and engaging with them regularly is the way to do it. If you can find providers that are happy to do that, we don't do heaps. We try to actually limit it. We might do 2 or 3 a month, right? That's kind of where we don't want to be doing, hundreds of SDAs, which few good ones at a time. So yeah, providers are happy to talk to us. I think you just got to find someone that you can work with. Yeah.
It's also, I think, worth pointing out that a lot of the SIL providers really still don't understand SDA.
That's
so true. Yeah, and then a lot of the SDA providers, might still be relatively small and they don't have the contacts with enough SIL providers to really understand what demand is going in any particular area.
And then lastly, if you do speak to them today or tomorrow, there's no guarantee that the SIL provider will be around in a year's time with the same participants.
Yeah.
And they've got somewhere else, another house down the road.
That's true as well.
So look, this is all part of the risks. The only way to mitigate it is, as Min said, the 3 Ds: design, desirable, location, data, and just making sure you're building the best possible product you can afford to build, because you will then attract the participants, even if there is a supply and oversupply in the same area. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Jim has just commented, thanks guys, lots of changes and developments from the NDIS to come by the sounds of it. Absolutely. Good conversation today from a one-off investor looking at getting into this market. Providers are certainly the risk. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Okay,
thanks, Jim.
any more?
Any last questions, comments before we close up?
We've still got a couple here from Mona from early on. Did you want to just quickly touch on those?
What are the questions? Let's have a look.
It was, thank you for the explanation for our normal housing, which is newly built. How can we give it to IL or SA category, which means FA category? We are ready if any changes are required to be made. Look, that's a tough one. It's a new house. You'll need to renovate it to the minimum requirements, which can, cost more than it's really worth. It may be different with the new shared living properties. We don't know what that's going to look like.
That question there, Debbie, that'll be a normal SIL house. It won't be an SDA house. It was a newly built one.
Yeah. And as a new category emerging, will the FA, SL and robust funding get the same for the provider? I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, Mona. Do either of you understand?
So overall, Debbie, have we answered the webinar topic, which is how we explain the impact of NDIS 2.0 on how or its impact on SDA with all these questions here today.
Well, I hope we've kind of gone into a bit more clarification on some of the points. You know, obviously it's a big monster to cover all these recommendations. And you did it. If anyone did not listen to the podcast episode, that was also very, very informative. You will get a list of these points, what it's really saying, and then Angad's analysis of that. But yeah, we just wanted to, I guess, introduce a conversation around this and just talk a bit further and hopefully clarify some of the misconceptions that have come out of this review.
Debbie, in your email out to everyone of this video link the podcast with Angad from last month.
I will
as well,
do.
please.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there was no other questions, then I think we might wrap it up. So thank you so much for your time today, everyone joining us. Thanks, Angad, again. You're amazing.
Pleasure.
And yeah, we'll see everybody on the next one.
No more balloons. No more balloons. It's finished.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Bye.
Thank you very much, guys. Take it easy.
Bye-bye. Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.